Joe Rogan was pressed on the historical evidence of Jesus. And the thing about Joe Rogan, he has been famously known for being an atheist and thinking that believing in Jesus is wrong, it's stupid, it's not right. But recently, he's been having a lot of guests come on, talk about Jesus. They all may not know that much, but they're having the conversation. So is this the day that Joe Rogan finally believes in Jesus? Watch till the end to find out. And guys, let me know in the comments what you think. When you guys comment, it means the world to me, and I love the conversation that it brings to the community. So keep it up. We're going to be reacting to Ruslan's video. He has some great commentary on this as well, so let's get right into it.
I'm telling you, this book, Case for Christ, the history, it's not even an opinion. He's not saying I want you to believe. He's like, here's the history. Here's why we... Dude, so like, if I said to you, Joe...
I like it. He's about to start cooking. Let's go, Chris.
Believe everything you've heard about Alexander the Great, right? You believe it. You know, he's fought in these battles. What they say, that you just believe it's Alexander the Great.
In class and in schools, everyone talks about how Alexander the Great's real, and we learn about him in school, and we learn about all these historical figures, but we can't learn about Jesus as like he existed, even though there's more historical evidence for Jesus existing than Alexander the Great. And he gets into the first biography of Alexander the Great was 300 years after he was already dead. And Jesus, they think that there's at least 100 years after he died. That's so much closer to the existence of Jesus than Alexander the Great. So when people say, oh, you don't even know if Jesus existed, that is baloney.
Because what you'll always hear is, well, the Gospels were written 100 plus years after Jesus died. Alexander the Great's first biography was written like 300 years after he died. So that right there is like, well, the historians of Jesus were much closer in time than, say, Alexander the Great. And even furthermore, back then, like the ancient Hebrews, they didn't have, before writing, they didn't write anything, so they would memorize the Old Testament and the Scripture. So that you had guys that they would pass down, right? They knew 5,000 pages of book inside of their head. So
that's a great point, that most of the stuff we take at face value that history just kind of believes. We omit that there's more manuscripts and they're closer to Jesus's actual life than there are any other character from antiquity. Only thing I would add to that is that the dates are even closer. The first Gospels were written 100 years after. They were written like 20, 30 years after. So, and there was books like 1 Corinthians was probably written 10 to 15 years after. I believe 1 Corinthians was written in 40 or 50 AD. So there's books that predate the actual Gospels that were in the New Testament.
Yes, the Gospels were 70 years later, but they were based off the accounts of people who were living at that time and up to like 25 years after it. And they say, oh, well, game of telephone. I can tell you something goes around the room, telephone. By the time it gets to me, 10 people, what you just said is irrelevant. It's a totally different thing. I get it. But what they said is because of that ancient...
Guys, literally, they would memorize the entire book of the Old Testament. You don't think they're not going to get that right?
These Old Testaments, because they couldn't write. It would be like if you're playing a game of telephone, but every person, I check with the person before to make sure the word I'm saying is right. And then I keep going. So then it's going to work because you're constantly checking. So that's what they said happened there. And I was like, okay.
That's a great point.
That's a little bit of confirmation bias, because the real problem is like who said it originally.
So what?
And who decided?
Eyewitnesses. That's who said it originally.
Luke actually interviewed people who been with Jesus, who've seen Jesus, who walked with Jesus.
Eyewitnesses, the people that were around, the 500 people that were around Jesus was on earth for 40 days after his resurrection, his glorified body. That's who said, all those people that witnessed him. At one point, he was in front of 500 people, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which is one of the oldest New Testament books.
Decided what the words were originally.
Okay, that I get that, which is true. But just for Jesus, this book was saying that the reason why they believe the historical accuracy of it is because his haters and the disciples were both saying the same thing. So you have the Romans saying, yeah, this is what happened, who hated him, and at that point would be like, get this guy out of here. He's basically causing a revolt. That's why we have to kill him.
I think he's referencing Josephus, some Roman historians. I'm not sure who he's referencing here, but I like it.
It's like somebody getting, a protester today. They were like, this guy, he's out.
Right.
And so they were saying, yeah, what you're saying happened. And then
the tomb was empty. He caused a revolt. There was followers of his, of the way, right?
And the disciples are saying it like a big thing is the resurrection, right? People say, really? resurrected from the dead, and you're like, well, everybody agreed.
Everyone agreed that Jesus' body was gone. The Romans said he was gone. The priests said he was gone. The Jews said he was gone. The followers of Jesus said he was gone. And they all had different reasons. Some were like, well, he was stolen. And other people were like, he rose again. And so you can at least agree that this did happen. So what is the more logical conclusion? Did he actually raise from the dead? Or did they steal his body?
Jewish people, everybody agreed he died. That's 100%. That's why when they stab him and you say water came out, it wasn't water, it was fluid from his lungs because he was dead. And that's what would happen to you or I when we die. We have this lung fluid that comes out. So that's what they said, oh, that's water. And that's what they made him divinity. But it was like a natural thing. He's dead. Everyone agrees. And you say, well, they buried him in a tomb. And then the next day, or 3 days later, the tomb's empty. People are like, so, that made up. And they say 500 people saw him in the town.
He's cooking.
Romans
He's cooking.
and Hebrew. They saw him over the next couple of weeks. 500 independently sourced people, real, corroborated, 500 people saw him. So you say, okay, so there's that. And then the other conspiracy theory is like, well, the disciples robbed his body.
His tomb,
the disciples just robbed his body.
Because I think most people agree that there was accounts and the disciples were convinced that he came back and that they never produced a body. I want to say that's agreed upon by many historians, that they were convinced. Like Bart Ehrman is one of those guys that will say, yes, they were convinced that they saw a bodily resurrected Jesus. I'm not sure if he will concede that the tomb was empty. So far, he's cooking.
Because they didn't want him, they would hand over crucifixion victims to the wild dogs. That used to be the way it was. If you got crucified, throw you in a pit, wild dogs eat you, or leave you on the cross, birds will eat you. That's how we deal with you. So they're like, that's why they were taking his body. And then you see that, well, that's probably not what happened. And the Romans themselves acknowledge there's no body in that tomb that we put in there 3 days ago. The body is not there, and we did it. So in order to save ourselves, we're going to say the apostles robbed it. But in reality, that's just a conspiracy because the apostles would have no reason to rob it.
They weren't expecting a bodily resurrection. The concept of this even happening was not something that they understood nor foresaw.
Romans think the apostles robbed the body.
That's a conspiracy.
Why do you say conspiracy?
Well,
You're saying a conspiracy to diminish the story.
No. I meant conspiracy in the sense of that's what people say as a reason why the
Did the Romans say that?
The Romans have said that. The
Yeah.
Romans said that back then, and then I guess
Right.
conspiracy is the wrong word because I'm not it's one story, one explanation. I'll say explanation of.
But if you looked at it, what's the most logical explanation? Is the most logical explanation that a dead guy came back to life, or the most logical explanation that someone took his body? Because that's what the Romans said.
I'd say the most logical is that Jesus did resurrect because all these people decided to follow him and believe in him because he did actually resurrect from the grave. He rose again, and therefore 500 people started to believe in Jesus and to name him Lord and Savior over their life because they saw him resurrect. If the resurrection didn't happen, then Christianity is useless. That's why it's so important that the resurrection happened.
The explanation is that people who had nothing to benefit from him being resurrected all said that he was resurrected based on accounts of women that were not very credible. And then these regular...
That's so good. These people had nothing to gain by saying that Jesus resurrected. They weren't going to become rich. They weren't going to become famous. Their lives weren't going to be safe. They had everything to lose to say that Jesus was resurrected. It's pretty easy for me to be like, I could see why everyone believed that Jesus resurrected because they actually lived it out like he did. Like he was resurrected. Do you think people would actually die for something that they knew was a lie? There's lots of people who die for things that they don't know is a lie. It might be a lie.
Just because I'm saying that
You
is
think
that
he came back to life?
one time. And I'm not saying I'm crazy about it. I'm just saying, you know what? After reading that book, there was enough things that happened that historical scholars who aren't religious, some are believers, some are not,
Right.
are like,
but
this existed
hold
and
on.
this happened.
But you're talking about historical scholars from 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And their knowledge of science and biology and
Right.
life and the universe itself was extremely limited.
Right.
And so their entire fundamentals, like everything they believed in, was based on mythology. Everything was based on gods and demons and.
Okay, so then what about this? All right, fine. What if the Romans, they made it up, right? I'm
made
sorry,
what?
the Romans are correct. The disciples took the body, who everyone agreed was
Okay.
dead. What about the 500 people that saw him in the town over the next 6 weeks?
This is a good
Did
point.
you talk to those people?
No.
So who knows
I don't
what
speak
they
Hebrew.
believed, but who knows what they actually believed? Who knows how they said it? Who knows if it was a religious thing? You look, there's people that have mass hallucinations all the time about a lot of things.
They don't have mass hallucinations about the same thing, the exact same thing. People have hallucinations, but it's totally different. You think 500 people are just randomly going to hallucinate Jesus resurrecting from the dead and seeing him? The same exact hallucination? That's crazy.
There's groups of people that have mass hallucinations. Individual hallucinations. I don't know if mass hallucinations are
Exactly.
a phenomenon that's common where all people see the same thing at the same time and it's not real. I don't know about that one.
People that you could give them false memory. False memory is a real thing. Someone can convince you that something happened that didn't happen.
Right.
It's real. It's like they've demonstrated how to do it. We all
Yeah, but at the cost of your life, you're going to create a false mass hallucination event that is going to cost you your life, or at the very least cost you a lot of social tension.
Like, let's just say the people who decided to, even if they wanted to hallucinate everyone and have this grand scheme to trick everyone, those people, the top of the people, those people all were murdered and killed for this lie. So I don't think that's anything to gain. People lie for gain, and they don't lie to lose things. That's just fact.
For being a Christian.
all know friends that have a memory of something, and you go, "That's not what happened," and then you
Yeah.
say your version of it, and then everybody has to like figure out what really happened.
Right.
You know, you're like, "Do you remember that time we were at the game
But a guy raising from the dead, Joe.
and you said this?" I didn't say that. Like that was not me.
Yeah.
that was Mike.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're like, "What? Yeah, yeah. You remember Mike lost his job?
Right.
And he was drunk. Do you remember?" And you're like, "Oh yeah." Like you thought it was me. Like you put it on me. It's like
Yeah.
you change things. Like
Right.
people change things.
Right.
They also your memory becomes a memory of your memory and not the actual memory itself.
True.
It becomes a memory of the story you're telling.
Right.
And so if this person was this significant religious guru figure like Jesus was, right? And he really does have this amazing view of how humanity can live in harmony. And he really does talk to people about this. And he really does preach forgiveness. And he really does like treat everybody like they're the same, paupers and hookers.
Right.
Everyone's just God's children, loved. When that guy's gone, you're going to miss him, man. You're going to miss him bad. And
Yeah.
if you really do have a fundamental view of reality that's based entirely on myth, and you have connected this guy to the Son of Christ, or the Son of God, rather, this figure that is brought here to save us, and the Romans took him from us and killed him, and now he died for our sins, and the whole thing.
Right.
If you have that in your head, and then someone says, I saw him, like, I saw him too.
Right.
Like, people see the Virgin Mary in a grilled cheese sandwich. People see things.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean
This man taking shots at the Virgin Mary.
those things aren't there.
Right.
It doesn't mean that isn't a vision, but it also does mean that people see things that
Yeah.
aren't. And there's a lot of people that are not that bright.
Yeah.
They're not smart, and they're easily led, and they're easily manipulated. But it also doesn't mean that Jesus wasn't real.
Right.
Like all those things. But it's just the likelihood of someone coming back to life is very low.
Right.
The likelihood of someone taking his body is very.
right.
The likelihood of someone taking his body is very high.
Right.
So if you use like Occam's razor, the simplest solution,
Right.
the simplest answer is probably what you're searching for.
The simplest answer is that he really grows, Joe. He really grows. That's the simplest answer. You have to come up with all this mental gymnastics and all these theories of all these people, mass hallucinations, which we don't really see happening. The simplest solution is that the most logical one is that he probably rose.
It's probably that someone took the body.
Where did they put it?
Well, you could put it anywhere. Like no one knows where Genghis Khan is buried.
No.
Genghis Khan, they did the wildest thing with him. They sent a pack
You don't think the Romans and the Jews, who both didn't want Jesus to be exposed, could have figured out where the body was after the body went missing?
of people to bury Genghis Khan. Then they sent another pack of people to kill the people everybody that went to Genghis Khan's funeral was murdered. They all got murdered by another group of people, and then those group of people got murdered by a separate group to make sure that no one had any understanding at all about where Genghis Khan was buried.
Oh my God.
To this day, no one knows where he was.
And
I
then
think thousands of people died.
But we know that he was buried, Joe. We know that he died and he was buried. There was no accounts of a resurrection with him.
His burial
But it's got to be somewhere in Mongolia, right?
somewhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
no one knows.
Yeah. I
Maybe
don't.
they could do LiDAR over the entire country and figure it out. But
Well, there'll be somebody will proclaim that they found it at some point.
maybe
You know.
they have no idea.
Very interesting conversation.
Such an interesting conversation, and I hope that Joe really gets to know Christ more, and really I pray that he experiences God's love, because there is a lot of historical evidence for Jesus, and I really hope that Joe really does experience the love of Christ, because there is a lot of evidence for Jesus. There's a lot of evidence, historical facts to prove that Jesus existed, even for the resurrection. And I encourage you guys, if you are wondering about Christ, if you don't know if he's real, if you haven't decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to really seek him today. And he will transform your life. He will change you into a new creation. He will set you free. He will make you into the person that you were created to be. So put him first. Surrender your life to Jesus, and he will be worth it. Love you guys. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts and questions and concerns are, because this one was crazy.